Now, at what point did you, or even your loved ones, get to the point where it was like, okay, I need to go seek some help. But it's just becoming like real bad. I need to go seek some help.
Well, here's where it turns for the worse. My father was dying, and I was living in Indianapolis. Everything was going great. I actually was having a great life. I had a job, I had my place, I had a great social life. I thought that everything was great here, and my father was lying to me about his health and how much it was declining. So when I would come back to visit that last time, I seen what it really was, and it really rocked my whole world. Like, my dad raised me. So once I realized that he wasn't well, my attachment to that drug became stronger and worse. And my priorities then shifted. You know, it went from being able to put it down once the weekend was over to just doing it. And so fast forward, my father died, and I was still doing it. But then I got introduced to something else. And, the devil works in ways, when you're weak and you're vulnerable. The devil will send gifts to you that you think are gifts wrapped in nice pretty box with a pretty bow on it, when it's a deception. So I was dealing with a guy, that I was really feeling at the time, and he introduced me to methamphetamines. And so now my father passed away, and it just went all downhill from there. Like, I didn't realize it, but yes, it just, the addiction, I didn't even do coke anymore. My addiction to meth had become so strong. Even though, I was maintaining myself, financially, my family never saw me. I was living out of hotels, and that might sound, cheap and trashy, but I was in fairly decent hotels, and I paid my way the whole time I was there. And it just the people that would come around me, you know me, I'm a very warming person, so that attracts people who are draining and who are really evil and who really hate that, so with that being said, it really spiraled out of control. My weight, now I will say that more people began to see that something was going on. Nobody ever knew. I never really openly said that I did that until really just now. People close to me, some people knew, but for the people outside looking in around, I'd say 2020, 2022, people started to know, 2021, people was like, yo, what's up, Alala? I was getting very skinny, just things on me was just deteriorating. Even though my fashion and creativity was all there, that was my only escape. Doing that. That's why I thank London so much for giving me the opportunity to do shows, because that's what really piqued my creativity again. If it wasn't for that, I really don't know what I was what I would have been doing with my spare time. Thank God. So yeah. Now what I will say, during the time that I was doing methamphetamines, it opened what people like to call the third eye chakra. And third eye chakra, right?
Third eye chakra.
Yeah. During that time, my consciousness expanded tremendously. Things that I never put into perspective spiritually were just lighting up. I didn't know how much of a master manifester that I was. I didn't know how spiritually connected I was. I didn't know how protected I was. I did not know that. I didn't. So the divine always lines things up in a way where it gets your focus here and there. So slowly but surely, I love music. I started to look up, what I was doing, I was staying in the hotels, and I started to look up how to get rid of negative energy. Random. I never did it before. Random. That one research opened so many catalogs to spirituality and self-awareness and self-love and all these things I didn't really have. Long story short, it also navigated me to things on YouTube. I personally love Abraham Hicks. She changed my life in regards to how I talk to myself in my head, how I am with myself, how I am with people. I'm still not fully mastered. I don't think that we ever fully mastered until we die. But, she just really opened up a channel for me, meditation and all that. Like when you look up stuff like that on YouTube, it opens up more stuff that pops up so for 2 years, I probably had been putting over hundreds of hours on YouTube looking up stuff, and that's what medicated me. That's what helped, because not only that, every day I was playing my gospel. I love Clark Sisters. I love the Clark Sisters, and I could get emotional talking about that, because I had never really been that connected, and I felt like when my dad passed away, his spirit was really like over me, like for real, to the point where it's like the decisions I was making, like, I don't know, like something shifted in my mind so strongly. Like I was so much more mentally strong, even though I was physically weak. But the power of the mind is one of the strongest things on earth. And that's what helped me to be able to stop on my own without any rehab, any medication. I just stopped cold turkey 2021 May.
Well, I never went to recovery. I never went to rehab. Glory be to the God of my understanding. Like I said, I've really been blessed and fortunate from the way I was raised, and then this my sense of responsibility. For me, if you want to call rock bottom, was when I lost my job. And then when I knew that I was going to lose my family, and not only my family, but I was going to lose myself. I know that death was impending, because at the end of my usage with crystal meth, I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I know at the rate I was going and the lack of me not taking care of my body, just as far as using the drug and then adding alcohol onto it and then adding weed and then taking sleeping pills. It was like a whole concoction of this, out of controlness that my body was going to give out. And I just had like an epiphany one day. I was like, you know what, this is going to kill me. So I have to stop. And I just stopped, this cold turkey stopped. And I got on my knees and prayed, and I said, Lord, I need you to deliver me from these vices and make it real, make it stick this time. And people always say, people don't change when they are dealing with substance issues. They don't stop until they're ready to stop. And that's a true statement. But you always don't have to reach a rock bottom or have something traumatic happen to you. But you can. For me, I saw what was going to happen, and it wasn't going to be pretty. And I cared about all the work that I had put into the things that I was involved in. And I didn't want that to be a part of my legacy, because that narrative is already out there for being black, gay, trans, being HIV positive. You're gonna die, you're gonna have a premature death, all because of social determinants of health that, pushes more towards that end of the spectrum of not having healthy outcomes. Because black gay people aren't the only people that deal with substance abuse. We just don't have the resources that you had mentioned readily available. But as I had said before, there's so much shame that comes along. Like I said, it's cool if you do coke, but boo, if you're a heroin addict or a fentanyl addict or a crystal meth addict, it's like you get shunned. And it's like you'd be surprised how many people actually are involved in that, and the subculture that we now have, the reemergence of crystal meth, especially in the nightclubs amongst our white counterparts. And now it has trickled into the black and brown communities really heavy. And so when I saw that, I didn't want to become a number. And like I said, I prayed and God delivered. He answered. And I wanted to live. And I had a reason to live.
When I think about the situations that I got myself into, say, if it wasn't the drugs themselves, it was the shady situations with the shady characters that I was getting involved with that would have been my end. And so finally, rock bottom for me was I was primarily staying with somebody who was living in their mother's house. They had a 2-family house or a 3-family house, and they had an apartment under the main house. And so he made himself very available to me because I had access to the drug. And so, you know, like if I needed to be driven somewhere, if I needed to, whatever, like he just made himself very available. And so when I lost my apartment, there was no hesitation, no question. He was like, you can come stay with me, because he knew that if I was with him, that the drug would constantly be in his house. And it just, I think the drugs changed all of us, but, in this particular case, the more that he would use and the more that he would be up, he would become like this really evil, sinister side of him would come out. So then what would happen was that once it became too much to bear, I would leave. And then I would find myself in parks and places where people were cruising for sex and using drugs until I ran out of drugs. And then I would crash, and I was waiting for whatever, the next unemployment check, or, until I pulled myself together enough to be able to pull a trick and, negotiate money or whatever the case may be. I would go to a friend's house and I would knock on his door, and he would never turn me away. Like, he would always let me come and sleep on his couch, and he would feed me. But the thing about the vicious cycle is, because I was up for so many days in a row, my body needed to catch up. And so I would crash and I would sleep for days in a row. And I would literally only get up to use the bathroom or to eat something. And it was like, I couldn't even keep my eyes open because I had been fueled, by drug for so long that now that there was no drug, my body was like, bitch, you're sleeping, you need to be in a coma for X amount of days. And, I remember my boy getting increasingly more frustrated every time that I would, especially after 4 or 5 days of literally being asleep on his couch. He would get up, he would go to the gym, he would go to work, he would come back, and I'd still be asleep on the couch for days. And so there was one day in particular where this vicious cycle had happened. I had left this dude's house that I had been using with because he got really, there was this really ugly, I remember there was this really ugly argument. So I left and I ended up in a park, and then I ended up in another park, and then I ended up in a park. The final park was the one that was closest to my boy's crib. And because I had discovered that there was, although it was much smaller than the rest, that there was a little cruise area in that park. So I remember I was out of drugs and the activity was minimal. I didn't find anybody to hook up with, and the sun was coming up and I was crashing really hard. And so, there was this feeling of sleaziness and dirtiness, and, the drug was wearing off. So I was getting really sleepy, and the depression that comes along with that crash. So I was in this park and the sun was coming up. So it must have been around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Whatever the, sunrise is in October, around this time of year. And I remember waiting as long as I could. I did not want to knock on his door at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I was like, okay, let me at least wait until after 9, or maybe even closer closer to 8 so that there isn't this rush hour activity on the street while I was crashing from these drugs. But, not early enough where I'm waking him out of his sleep. But I couldn't anymore. I couldn't. It was either that or just pass out on the park bench. So I walked to my friend's house and I knocked on his door and he looked through the peephole and he opened the door and I stood there and he wasn't his like usual welcoming, friendly self. He was stank. And he just looked at me and I remember feeling really awkward thinking like, are you gonna let me in? And he was like, Rob, you can shower and you can eat, but don't fall asleep because I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna take a shower and I'm gonna go to the gym. And when I leave, you have to leave too. And I remember thinking, well, fuck, there goes another bridge. I just burnt another bridge. So I took a shower first while he made me something to eat. And then I remember when he got in the shower, I asked if I could use his computer. Because the plan was, since I can't sleep here and I'm so exhausted, the only thing that's going to keep me going is more drug. So I got on all my websites. That was pre-smartphones, right? So there were no apps, there were websites. So I logged onto all my websites. I logged onto my MySpace. Like I was desperately trying to make something happen so that when he was leaving to the gym, that I would have somewhere to go to continue the party, right? So that I could continue to get high and figure out where the fuck I was gonna end up. Because when you're in active addiction and you've lost everything, the only other solution is keep it going, right? So I logged into my MySpace and there was someone who is very significant in my life. She's actually the woman that inspired me to write poetry, to put pen to paper the first time. So she is somebody that's very significant in my life right now, but specifically at that point, she was the only thing in my life, the only one in my life. But like my association to her that I was still passionate and invested in that had nothing to do with using. So there was a DM message. We weren't calling it DM back then. I don't know what it was called. But there was a DM from her on my MySpace with the subject title, Deep Thoughts. And she proceeded to read me and to tell me that she knew I was destroying myself and that I'm recalling even after all these years, I still recall what it was that she said to me in that message, and it's still a lot for me to handle. And so that was a bridge that was too much for me to bear. So I remember responding and like trying to write her a message. But I was literally crying waterfalls. Like I couldn't see the keys through my tears. And my boy came out of the shower and he's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was literally like, like the ugly cry, right? Trying to like tap this message out. And he like barked on me and he's like, "Okay, yeah, nah." Like he's like, the crying shit and all that, I can't. And I was like, "Wait, please, like, please." With that said, I picked up the phone to call my sister True. And I simply said to her, "I'm ready." And true to true form, she was like, "Where the fuck are you?" And I was like, "I'm at Fabian's house." And she's like, "Put that motherfucker on the phone." So she told him that she was coming to get me and to not let me leave. And so, you know, I heard him reciting off the address, and then like he sucked his teeth and gave me back the phone. And she's like, "Look, I don't give a fuck." She was like, "Do not leave. I'm coming to get you." So, you know, in the process, I continued to try and find the next thing, you know, because I was still trying to figure out what my escape route was going to be. But when I told her I was ready, you know, there was already a rehab in mind, like, because we had that conversation, you know, in one of those sobering discussions. Like, even the Poetry Collective was getting ready to say, it's too much, you know. So that's when I checked into the rehab. She took me to the rehab, and I was there for a year. I was in that motherfucker for a year.
I would say I had the repercussions of substance use, buying drugs. I got arrested, and I got arrested in New Jersey for obstruction of traffic, which was a really weird thing. My mother asked me, "What were you doing? Laying out in the middle of the road that you obstructed traffic? How does that happen?" And I told her it was more of a code for me working as a sex worker to afford my habit. And I guess they called it obstruction of traffic because cars would stop to pick you up. It was a weird thing, but that I remember. And my mother and my family didn't really know how to help. My stepmother was the one who told my father, "You've got to stop giving her money." So, you know, we'd go for, you know, a visit with the kids to my father's house. And my father, when he dropped me off, my stepmother used to not leave his sight. So he couldn't give me money, but he always tried. He's like, cigarette money. Meanwhile, there'd be $100 bill in my hand. So it got to the point where I knew I needed help, but eventually me not being able to get into a treatment program the day I was ready, and my mother was going to take the train with me to this place, and they had no beds and they sent me back home. When those kind of things happen now, doing the work that I do, we know that when somebody is ready, you have that one moment of opportunity. And if you miss it, it's a great excuse not to get help. So eventually, through the criminal justice system, being arrested and being in Rikers Island, which is the jail in New York City, for 6 months, that I got a judge who knew that, like, my criminal activity didn't happen because prior to, it only happened after me using drugs and being addicted to drugs. So he's like, "You gotta help this woman with her addiction, and the other part is gonna take care of itself." So he was someone who was very smart, very, very, very intuitive, and knew that if we treat the addiction, the criminal part of it is gonna go away. So he said, "I'm giving you a shot to go to treatment, residential treatment program, and in 5 years, as you report," I had to report using my handprint. So I had to go to report. It wasn't quite a parole or probation officer. It was a type of probation that I could go to, like a machine, and just check in with my handprint once a month. And I never missed it for 5 years, because that treatment program was what I needed for someone to show me finally how to survive without heroin, how I could get by. So I was on methadone in jail. And so when I went to treatment, it was a treatment program that actually helped you detox from methadone slowly, or what they call slowly. I say now what I know, and professionally, it's still too quick. But I've only been in recovery one time in my life. I was not one who kept going out, coming back, going out. It was like by the time I went to recovery, I was so beaten down, and I was 36 years old. And my addiction started at 19, 20. 19 was the first time I started heroin, that one night. And so when I was 36, I was at the point where I wanted my children. I wanted a life. I wanted to be here. I had an AIDS diagnosis, and I just wanted someone to help me not use anymore. And so that's how I got into treatment. And from then on, I just followed every recommendation